Welcome to the Four Listeners Program. Welcome aboard, everybody. Thanks for checking us out this week. What up, everybody? I'm Spear, and on the mics with me this week is the Z-Man. What is up, Z? Ooh, I like the whistling. Oh, nice.
Nobody likes whistling. Nobody but the whistler likes whistling.
But I like that. It was a change of pace.
All right.
I like that. Nice. And on the other mic is the mighty Ganthor. What is up, Ganthor?
How you doing?
I'm doing good, buddy. How about you? How you doing?
I'm good. I got a nice beer.
Nice. What do you got? What are you drinking?
Sam Adams, something or other.
Something or other?
Yeah,
Way to narrow that down. It's not like Sam Adams doesn't make like 70 beers.
They make like 8,000 beers. I don't remember what it was, but it's delicious.
Well, there you go. What happened to the label? Isn't there usually a label on the bottle?
Yeah, but I don't drink out of bottles. I pour it into glasses.
Wow, an aristocrat. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. You couldn't tell after all these years that I hate people and think I'm better than them?
Well, there you go. I guess I should have called that one. All right. This week, something must be done about the Star Wars special editions. And I'm prefacing this with an article that I read on The Ringer a couple of weeks ago about J.K. Rowling, the creator of the Harry Potter universe and all of its works. The question was about whether or not J.K. Rowling should continue to develop the whole Harry Potter world. Lately, there's been the Fantastic Beasts movie a couple of years ago. It was a pretty big hit, I think, and they're planning on making 4 more of these movies. There are some who believe that she should just quit. She should just stop and let other people take on the Harry Potter mantle to carry on the story ahead of her.
What are their qualifications?
Well, any of these other people? Well, I don't know if it's so much any particular people as that they don't want it to be J.K. Rowling because they don't want her to get too wrapped up in her world that she can't see the forest for the trees, like another auteur who created a universe, George Lucas.
Mm-hmm.
George Lucas had a similar problem where he wanted to continue to develop stories around his universe and around his characters, but ended up killing the golden goose. Or did he? There's a point that's made in this article that if it weren't for the Star Wars special editions that came out in the mid-90s, it was 1997 for the 20th anniversary, where Lucas went in and changed a whole bunch of stuff, put in a bunch of deleted scenes, added a lot of different special effects, even changed some of the scenes within the movies, wiped out whole scenes and replaced them with others. There were some people that were saying, "Why, George? Why did you do that? Why did you rape my childhood?" Did you feel like that when you saw those movies in the 90s?
Yes, I did. I was very disappointed with what they've done too.
Was there anything
the whole basis of characters that I'd grown up with?
There was one scene in particular that drastically altered a major character.
That's correct. That's enough for me.
There was the one made the whole Greedo and Han scene in the cantina where Greedo and Han are facing each other down. And if I'm spoiler alert, if this is a spoiler for anybody listening to this, I'm sorry, it shouldn't be. But there's a scene in the cantina where Greedo is saying, "I'm going to take you in the Jabba," and he goes, "Over my dead body," and then shoots Greedo
in cold blood.
It's kind of like a gunslinger with his gun under the table.
Yep.
And Lucas decided that wasn't what he wanted the character of Han to be. He had established Han in the later movies to be a little bit more of a, kind of a daring do type of person, but not exactly cold-blooded. So he had Greedo shoot first, so as to make Han a little bit more sympathetic, a little less cold-blooded.
Greedo's got Han held at gunpoint, threatening to take him to Jabba, right?
Right.
And Han shoots Greedo in cold blood to get away from Greedo so that he doesn't get delivered to Jabba. Yes. Who does Han run into in the spaceport on the way to his Millennium Falcon?
Jabba the Hutt.
Whose tail does he step on?
Jabba the Hutt.
Spaceport. And who lets him go?
Jabba the Hutt and
Boba
Fett.
Of more money.
Jabba the Hutt and Boba Fett.
It's completely incongruent with the whole scene with Greedo.
So that scene was filmed in the 70s with an actor wearing a fuzzy costume, and the idea was that it was going to be filled in with a stop motion animation character that was supposed to be hairy, which is why Han walks behind him. When they had to go in the 90s and redo that scene now with Jabba having been established as this giant slug, it posed a problem, because if you want to put this scene back in, you have to figure out a way to get Han to walk behind the character. So the only way they could do that was to shift him up and over. But that scene was filmed. That scene was part of the original.
I guess, but still, it completely like, he was in no danger. I mean, he stepped on his tail. You're telling me if you owed that much money that there was a price on your head that you just murdered a dude to get away from, you're going to then go step on a dude's tail?
Well, it certainly neuters Jabba a little bit, because Jabba's supposed to be the most vile gangster in the universe.
Yeah.
And Han just casually steps on his tail and then walks away.
Yes, exactly.
That's a little that's a little forgiving there for the most vile gangster in the universe.
Yeah, it just doesn't fit. And that was bullshit just to do bullshit, to show, oh, look, I can just throw a random computer-generated character in with footage shot in 1970. Look at how wonderful ILM is.
All of this is given, okay? Lucas has always been more enamored with his technical wizardry than he is with the actors, or even the story for that matter. And I'll argue the story in just a second. But he's always been much more interested in his technical wizardry, which is why he never feels like and he said this before, I never felt like I finished the movie that I wanted to make. So the special editions were his way of completing, or at least trying to complete, the movies that he wanted to make in the 70s with the technology that was available to him in the 90s. And that's why he continued to tweak them, even up to the point where he sold the whole thing out to Disney. I don't have a problem with that. And the writer of this article didn't have much of a problem with it either, because he wrote it from the perspective of somebody who was first exposed to Star Wars in the 90s. His point was, I'm reading his quote now, if not for Lucas's clumsy attempt to give his classics a facelift, or his even more misguided efforts to extend the Star Wars story, we wouldn't be living in a world where Star Wars movies are annual events. I have a tendency to agree with him. If it wasn't for the special editions coming out, we would have missed a generation of Star Wars fans. What do you say about that?
I don't know how I feel about that. I have to begrudgingly admit that he probably has a point. He's fucked up his children so bad, a good foster parent came in and has rescued these children.
So how about you, Z? You've been quiet. Does George get any credit at all for keeping the Star Wars fire stoked by exposing Star Wars to millennials in the 90s through the special editions?
No, Disney gets the credit.
Well, Disney only gets the credit now because there was such an appetite for it, no?
I think I bet you it comes back to superheroes, and they're like, oh, the Star Wars people are like, how can we cash in on this shit where they get a different movie every week?
Well, that was certainly why I think they bought Lucasfilm, but it had to be something that was still interesting, something that could still generate interest and money for Disney to want to invest $4-something billion in the franchise.
You think so?
I
don't think
so.
It's people our age finally being put into positions of power and responsibility where they can take corrective steps to fix the problem?
Well, look at like was it is it Legend or is it Dark Crystal they're redoing? Dark Crystal, right?
Yeah, I think they're redoing Dark Crystal, sure.
So that doesn't have shit to do with Jim Henson. It's just people are like, hey, you know what was cool? Dark Crystal was cool. Let's redo it. Okay. Voltron was cool. Let's redo it. Okay.
Well, is that a matter of having a property that's laid fallow for a while, that somebody says, oh, that's something that we could use to kind of reboot? Or is that because there's been interest in Dark Crystal or Voltron now over the course of the last 30, 35 years?
I think just the banal, empty mindlessness of Hollywood just scraping for stuff that they can get cheaply and
it's the people from our generation now finally in positions of power at these studios. Millennials don't give a fuck.
Yeah, they don't care about anything except cats.
Except cats. So there's nothing to be said then about Star Wars still being this behemoth of pop culture over the course of the last 40 years that Lucas has kind of stoked in the 90s and again in the early aughts with the prequels leading all the way up to 2012. You're just telling me now it's because our generation is now in the position of making choices.
It may be credited to Lucas in bringing that stuff out. Okay, I could maybe agree with that, but not because that was his plan. He's an idiot, and he just keeps stumbling into winning lottery tickets somehow.
Look case in point. Look at Indiana Jones. There was a movie that never needed to be remade.
That is,
and make the fourth one. That was what's worse, the fourth Indiana Jones or the fourth Star Wars?
Well, that is, you mean the
Star Wars 1.
You mean the Phantom Menace or Crystal Skull?
Ugh. Yeah,
that's a close one.
What's
Crystal
worse?
Skull.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah,
I would never watch Crystal Skull again.
Yeah.
Not that I would ever watch Phantom Menace again, but
so there you go.
Well, but all right, but that brings up an interesting question. Now that Disney bought Lucasfilm, they want to make another Indiana Jones movie with a 70-something-year-old Harrison Ford still in the titular role. Look, as much as I love the original Indiana Jones movies, as much as I'd like to see a good Indiana Jones movie again, there's just no way to do it with a 70-something-year-old Harrison Ford.
Well, sure you can. You can just, he could still be like the guy who told him the legend, telling the story.
Just like they did at the beginning of Last Crusade, River Phoenix.
Well, sure, get another actor to play Indiana Jones.
Yeah. I'm saying they could keep old Ford and have him flash back to young Ford.
God, do you think there's a chance that they might do a prequel now?
They have to. That there's no story that they have to back their way into. There are no characters that you have to tie together. He's just Indiana Jones all over the world finding artifacts and fighting bad dudes.
Yeah,
he's got to make sure Indy doesn't die.
Right. Yeah, and he's got to survive.
But his supporting actors could die potentially.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
You could talk about how badass would it be to have meet young Marcus, right?
Yeah. Yeah, there's a whole backstory there, and they did that too with the young Indiana Jones Chronicles. It was a TV show that had Sean Patrick Flannery in the 90s, I believe. It was like the late 80s, early 90s, maybe. And that was a whole Lucasfilm thing too. So there's plenty of yeah, it was pretty good. There's plenty of stuff to mine there in terms of story, and you could probably do Indiana Jones as kind of like a James Bond type of deal where they just get different actors to keep playing Indiana Jones. James Bond has had several actors playing James Bond throughout the decades-old history of James Bond. The James Bond movie series is the longest in history.
Is it longer than your mom's movie career?
Oh my God! So it was about 10 years ago that Crystal Skull came out. Do you think there's still enough interest in an Indiana Jones movie for it to be a huge thing? Look at what happened with Force Awakens. It was one of the biggest movies of all time. Do you think there's still enough interest in Indiana Jones to make it, that big of a blockbuster?
I think there's a lot more Star Wars fans than there is going to be Indiana Jones fans. Star Trek didn't do nearly as well with all their new movies, and I think it's the same thing. It's just people aren't as fanatical.
And I think I tend to think that that's because there's been a generational thing. Like there was a much longer gap, between Last Crusade and Kingdom of the Crystal Skull as there was between what went on in the 90s and then in the prequels and then the what have yous. There's always been Star Wars. Always been Star Wars.
You know what it is though? Is and this is one of the things that I always hate about Star Wars is they played it to kids, right?
Yeah.
They always made Star Wars about kids. Star Trek was never about kids. Indiana Jones was never about kids.
That's right.
Much as we hate the Ewok and the fucking Jar Jar.
Jar Jar. That's
and BB-8. We don't hate BB-8 as much, but they're like that annoying sidekick / laugh machine.
Because it's always been a kid's story. It's always been marketed to children, which is why I thought the whole Rogue One thing was a bit of a different step. It was a little bit more of an adult movie that had much more. It was a war movie. It certainly wasn't a kids movie like some of the other Star Wars movies were.
Right. That's what they did with Wonder Woman too. They made it a war movie.
Right. Yeah. And the thing about Rogue One is that it could have been that you could tell that the DNA for a much darker movie was in there.
Yeah.
But it feels like Disney neutered it so that it was still marketable to children.
Yeah, they didn't go like Christopher Nolan Batman on it.
Oh, it could have been. There was the DNA of a much darker movie in there, And
Yeah.
you could see it was there, and you could see it in some of like the trailer scenes that were cut with like dead bodies in the water and Krennic walking through. Like there were so many things that were the imagery in the trailer just alluded to a much darker movie that it feels like got washed by Disney. And you wonder whether or not Disney didn't do the story right, or is Disney just doing this because it's cash now? I'm going to bring up a touchy subject, Ganthor. I'm going to bring up the prequels, the movies that shall not be named, because I think we have to finally have this conversation, man.
I'm waiting.
All right, we gotta have this out, man. Did the prequels, in your mind, do more harm or more good to Star Wars?
Harm.
You think harm?
Yeah.
Why?
I would say good.
They turned it from an interesting, semi-respectable story into something completely ridiculous.
How so?
The whole fact that two Jedi couldn't save Anakin and his mother because some race is immune to Force persuasion. The fact that everything happens on Tatooine and that Vader built the robots that he doesn't recognize ever later. All that bullshit stuff.
Metachlorians.
Oh, yeah. How could I forget that?
Thank you, Z. Appreciate you bringing that one up, pal.
Why don't we find a unobtainable metal on this planet too, and we'll call it unobtainium?
Unobtainium. They did that movie too, wasn't that Avatar? Unobtainium. Yeah. So you think they did more harm than good with the prequels?
Absolutely.
You said they did
Do
good.
you disagree?
Z-Man said they did more good than harm.
I'd say they did good. I think with the exception of the first movie, I think they did a good job of giving us the backstory on Anakin, how he got to be where he did, why he fell in line with the bad side, the dark side.
What do you say to that, there, Ganthor?
Nah.
So there's
I think could they have done a better job telling that story? Sure, but I think the story was a good story to tell.
Well, that's the argument that I always make about the prequels, is that the story was the right story to tell. How the story was told, the writing, the acting, that's where it was left wanting.
Yeah. So now you can't do it the way it needs to be done.
Well, by whose standards, right? I mean, again, these were the movies that Lucas wanted to make, and that's why he didn't want to make any more movies. And he actually made a point of saying, why should I make any more Star Wars movies when everyone hates what I make? I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but I think that was like one of the things he said. He's like, why would I do that? Why would I make any more Star Wars? People just complain. And I'm something of an apologist. I love the prequels for what they were there to do, which was to tell the story of Anakin Skywalker, to tell his story about how he grew into loving this woman, how he grew into having all of this power and not being able to do anything to save the people that he loved with his powers, and how that drove him to the dark side.
Did they show any of his great feats of starfighter piloting?
They showed some of it in at the
when
very
he was
beginning.
A 6-year-old kid.
Well, they showed some of it at the end of Phantom Menace, and they showed some of it in the beginning of Revenge of the Sith. The rest of it was told in the Clone Wars.
Yeah, see, you've lost me already.
But you have to consider the Clone Wars as part of those cartoons. You have to consider them part of the story.
No, I'm not watching all that stuff. I want to watch a movie.
Dude, the cartoons are badass.
Yeah, they're pretty badass.
I'm not denying that they're badass, but there's like 800 of them, and I don't want to watch that. I want it to be told in a movie.
I think they showed for me, they showed enough of it. They showed enough of his skill with a lightsaber. They showed enough of his Jedi skills, if you will, to demonstrate that he was good.
An apologist.
Well, I preface this by saying that I'm an apologist.
I know, but I'm using that word as negatively and as disgustingly as I can. You, sir, are an apologist.
I am. I readily admit this. And the nice thing about the prequels for me is that it also showed the kind of the Machiavellian machinations of Palpatine, who eventually became the Emperor, how he kind of created this entire scenario from the very beginning to put himself into a position of power to rule the entire galaxy. That was Lucas's story. Lucas's story was, how did Anakin rise and fall? How was he ultimately redeemed? And how was Palpatine kind of a part of this whole overarching story that finished at the end with Anakin redeeming himself? That to me is the genius part of how the prequels enriched the rest of the story. To me, that's why they did more good than harm. I will not argue that they were horribly written. Lucas can't write a love story to save his damn fool life. And the acting was so indescribably bad in Attack of the Clones, I won't even begin to defend that. But the story was worth it. What say you?
Disagree.
Disagree.
Could have been done better.
As much as you may disagree, do you really believe that he did harm with the prequels? I mean, can you really say that? Can you say
They're
that
horrible.
given the absolute interest and the feverish fandom that Star Wars still possesses?
Dude, people would have been happy with anything.
Do you believe that people were excited for the sequels now, the new movies, as a way of redeeming the prequels, being, all right, well, those things were horrible. Let's get some good Star Wars. I'm excited for that shit.
I think there's definitely an upturn in expectations now. I think people are cool with or on board with how it's going, the direction they're taking.
Well, certainly after Force Awakens, it was such a big hit. But even before that, I mean, when Disney announced that they bought Lucasfilm, they immediately announced in 2012 that they were going to put out a new Star Wars movie in 2015. And that's when the hype machine started. Do you think that at that point that people were excited for the new Star Wars movies?
I think everyone's expectations were set low.
So it was the Force Awakens that kind of restarted the whole Star Wars fandom machine.
Yeah, I mean it's a new generation, right? It's the children of the uber nerds. It's the children of the people born in the 70s.
Right, so it's our generation's children. The folks
Right.
that are like in their late 30s, early 40s. They have kids around.
All my friends' kids are like super nerds when it comes to like Star Wars.
Yep. So is mine.
But like we missed like the millennials. They don't know what the fuck it is all about.
See, I disagree with that. I think the millennials are all in on this stuff now.
I don't think it is. I think it's still it's our generation and our generation's children.
See, I got to believe that because, and it was the thing that this author said, that because the special editions were out in the 90s, that group of millennials at a young age was exposed to Star Wars on the big screen in a big way. And that's what kind of stoked the fire. That's why 20 years later, we're still talking about this. Like, it's still a big deal. And it's a cross-generational affair from Gen X to Gen Y to whatever what is the new thing that they said now? If you're not a millennial, but you're not Gen Y or something
You're
like
Zennial.
A Zennial?
Zennial.
What the fuck is that about?
That is the new term, Zennial.
Those motherfuckers, too. They're all in on Star Wars.
What's this have to do with Harry Potter?
It's tangentially related. I can start any conversation and then make it Star Wars. That's how I do it. All right, let's wrap this thing up. So what do we learn? What do we learn about Star Wars, Harry Potter, franchising things? What do we learn, Z-Man?
It sounds like you got to get it kid-focused in order to make it succeed.
Yeah, man. That is for damn sure. Ganthor, what'd you learn?
That you will watch anything and everything Star Wars.
If it's got Star Wars on it, yeah.
And don't forget about Reed.
Yeah, I read them
Reed's
too.
too.
It's true. It's true. You're not wrong. You're not wrong. What did I learn? I learned that I'm just as much of an apologist today as I was when the prequels came out. Yes, Ganthor, I am an apologist. I don't apologize for being an apologist.
That's so anti-apologist, though.
There you go. So if you're an apologist or you like the prequels or you want more Star Wars or you're a millennial that loves Star Wars and saw it in the 90s, why don't you go ahead and let us know on the Facebook page, facebook.com/4listeners or 4listeners.com. You can check out the show on Stitcher Radio, on Apple Podcast, or on Google Play. Just search for 4 Listeners and we'll pop right on up. And you can give us a tweet on the Twitters at 4Listeners. We thank you for checking us out this week, and we hope that you will check us out again next week. May the Force be with you, everybody. Well, let's be honest. The original version of Jabba the Hutt that was put in there in 1997 was terrible. Terrible. In the words of the immortal Merrill Reese, it was awful. Awful, awful, awful. It was bad.
Your Merrill Reese is way better than your Charles Barkley.
Yeah, I know.